the video I did in 2017. The blower fans have gone out on this stove and I need to replace them. The fans that you can buy, and it from my research, even the fans straight from Englander, they're not actually just a drop-in. The flange needs to be bent, and for one side you have to bend one edge of the flange, and on the other side you have to bend the other edge. Okay, here are the fans. Here is one of the old fans I took off, the room blower fans. You can see it has the bent flange. And this would have been the other blower fan. You can see if you look at it, the flange is bent in the other direction. And just so you can see what it is, it's a Fasco is the aftermarket one that I got. Model number 50752-D500. Shaded pole, 135 CFMs, 1.1 amps, 115 volts, 2860 RPM, 1 speed. Sleeve bearing. Okay, I wanted to show you what happened to the previous blower motors. I told you the bearings burned out on them. So this shaft, of course, spins on the motor to spin the fan, and it's got a set of sleeved bearings. Basically what they are is a brass sleeve that the steel motor shaft that's hooked to the fan just rotates on, and it's got some packing material around it, some fibrous cloth packing material around the bearing area that is soaked with oil that then seeps in and helps to lubricate between the shaft and the brass sleeve. Well, I failed to do the proper periodic maintenance on the previous set of motors, and eventually the oil ran dry and they brass on steel basically just wore out and burned out. So what it turns out is that you see these little holes right here on the motors, one at the top, one at the bottom. You put a little bit of motor oil, machine oil down in there, and bearing oil, and it'll go down there and it'll soak that little cloth reservoir, and then over time it'll absorb or leak out into the bearing areas. Just take in, you'll find those holes, and put a drop of oil, a drop or two in. Just get a little squeezed out. So these are probably already pre-oiled, so I don't need to put a lot in there. But just showing you, just put a little bit of oil down that hole. And that's part of the periodic maintenance that I should have done previously was, gave them a dab of oil, just like I do my swamp cooler, I guess, not air conditioner, but my swamp cooler. Each year when I put it up, give the bearings a little bit of oil. So anyhow, that's what happened last time, is I failed to put that little bit of oil in here, and eventually the bearings just went dry and burned up, kind of like you'd expect them to. All right, what we're going to do is bend these blower housings so that we have a bend on one side and a bend on the other side, so that when we fit them up underneath the stove, they mount up properly. So basically we're going to take these brand new blowers, put them in a vise, and bend them. You can see that they need to be bent up toward the hole, one on one side, one on the other, because they're opposites. So what we'll do is we'll start with this one, and we'll just put it in the vise, and we'll give it a bend and just see how that works. And if it works, great, and then if it don't, we'll try something different. But let's put her in there, just give it a little bend, a little bit at a time, so we can kind of catch up. And if you didn't have a vise, probably a set of pliers or something, a big set of vise grips or something might work. That bend, you can see it's bent, pretty much right up at the edge. So I've slid this down in here. I want to bend a little more, so what I need to do is come up on a little bit higher and bend it just a little bit flatter. There we go. And there we go. So that one was the easy one because it was away from the motor, so there was lots of room to work. Now let's see how the other one works. That looks just like factory, man. So this one's got to be on the motor side. So let's see if we can slide this in here. Yeah, you got to get it in there in a way that we can clamp on it and have it fit. So unfortunately, it's not a great fit. I could probably build some jaw extenders or something like that, but we're just going to try and bend this, and hopefully it'll bend the whole thing. That looks like it's working. Bend that over. And this metal's not that thick particularly, so it's bending relatively easy. You can just see I've got a little simple 5-inch vise here, nothing particular. Particularly special, a woodworking vise. Anything that you can just get a little bit of a hold on it. And like I said, I'm confident you could actually bend it with pliers if you needed to. Okay, the next thing we need to do, we got the flanges bent. The next thing we got to do is hook up the wiring. So on these motors, we need to take off this cover. It's just, in this case, it's a 5/16 screw. Take that off. Take off the cover. And inside here, you see there are 2 wires. And then we have in this case, the wires that I recovered from the previous motors, because they already have the correct end on them. And one thing you do need to check those when you cut them off, make sure they're going to be long enough to go from the controller down to the new motor now that you've turned them off of the older motor. Now, there's a lot of different ways to hook wires together. Wire nuts, crimp-on ends, solder. I'm going to use solder. So these wires are already stripped, so we need to strip back these wires. And there are a lot of different wire strippers out there. I happen to like this style, but a lot of different strippers available. Just put that in there, close it, strips back the wire, does a pretty good job. So there we go. And then to protect the wires, once I get them soldered together, I'm going to use heat shrink tubing. If you're not familiar with it, it's really nice when you compare it to just black electrical tape that I used to use when I was a kid. So what they are little plastic sheaths, little tubes, and when you get them hot, they shrink down and they're plastic, and they make a protective covering over the wire. And they come in all different sizes, big fat ones, little skinny ones, and they're pretty nice. You put them on there and they're pretty much permanent. Now they do shrink with heat, they'll just shrink down the tubing. So when you got to slide them on first, because they're not going to fit over the connectors once you get the wires soldered together. But you got to put them on and slide them away so that the heat from the soldering doesn't pre-shrink them in the wrong place. So we'll slide these 2 on. Then we'll take our wire, and there's a lot of videos on YouTube about how to solder wires together, so I'm not going to go into a lot about that, but I tend to like to twist the wires together. Then in a minute I'll hit them with some solder. I'll just do them both at the same time, and we'll solder them both at the same time while we got the iron hot. Soldering iron's hot. Just put this on here. Okay, looks like that one worked. Okay, now what we do is we take this heat shrink tubing, slide it up over the joint enough that it covers to both sides, gets clear up on the wire insulation. Slide both these up here. Then what we're going to do is we're going to hit them with a hot air gun. And there you go. You have a nice strong connection, soldered together. It's not coming apart, won't vibrate apart, won't pull apart. And then covered with some heat shrink tubing, something to protect it. I like to use these tie wraps. You can see it where I have these. Well, those are black, hard to see. You can see these tie wraps that pull these wires together, kind of dress them up, make them a lot easier to work with, so you don't have a tangled rat's nest. So that's one reason. But I'm also going to use them to strain relief. So I'm going to take these wires, give a little slack, and zip tie it to one of these holes. That way if the wires get pulled on, they don't pull down into the motor guts. They'll take up the strain right there. What I'll do is I'll just thread this through this mounting hole. Make sure I got a little bit of slack, and zip tie this. And what it'll do is, then make sure you got a little slack on the motor side. That way, if something tugs on it in use, it'll tug on the strain relief part, not the wires where they go down into the body. Okay, something else I want to show you. I don't know if you can see it, but right up here where the blower motors mount, there's a piece of fiberglass insulation on both sides. And the idea behind that is that's where the flange of the blower sits. And the idea is it tries to insulate it, because that's the firebox right there. You're trying to insulate some of that heat away from the motor, because that's what kills motors, is the heat. So if you have that piece of fiberglass insulation there, it's the same kind of stuff that seals the doors, and you can just buy it at your local Ace Hardware or your stove store. But if you have that, it's better to use it when you shove that motor flange up in there, and try to insulate it away from the firebox. So we're going to go ahead and start mounting these. Let's just start with this side first, and like I said, try to make sure you've got that insulating fiberglass in there. Then you just fit that up to there, line up the holes, and it should fit right in. Motors mounted in there, ready for the next heating season.
I hope you found that useful, but do remember that you're working with 110 volt voltage, line voltage, and this is working on your heating source. So if you're not comfortable with any of this, be sure to contact a trained professional.